Hello again, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here, and today I'm reviewing the Minifuse 2 from Arturia. A while back on the channel you may have seen the video that I did about the AudioFuse 8 pre-rack, which I still use a lot and is actually being used right now to record the new Monuments album. That's how good it is, that's why it's not in the rack back there, it's been lent to the guys producing the Monuments album. So, safe to say, it's good gear. Arturia have now made their entry level with the Minifuse range, because the AudioFuse range, as great as it is, had quite a high price entry point. This is somewhere around the €200 range, as are the Minifuse 1 and Minifuse 4. We'll talk more about the exact prices in Studio B, where we'll check this out. There is currently no Minifuse connected to the computer. So now we take the USB, and there is a USB hub on the back of here, which is really useful if you've got limited ports on your machine, let's say you're running a laptop. I can see that being really cool for putting something extra like, I don't know, a keyboard or a mouse or something like that in there. I'm going to plug this into the USB down here. Ding! That should come up any second now. I can see lights coming on there. It may well be just installing the drivers at this point. It says Minifuse 2 in the control center and it says not activated. So I can activate it. Where'd you go? Activate and install all, and that will then do the rest of that with the extra plugins for me whilst I finish plugging the Minifuse itself in. So while that's been installing, I'm just going to move my camera around because this is now on the other side of my desk. It just didn't like being plugged into a hub, which is completely fair, but yeah, it did come up now with this folder on the other screen. So there's a click here to get started, which means that if I'd just plugged in that first, that would have taken me straight to the same page we were at. But if I now open the Minifuse control center, it says click OK to complete installation. And there we go. So there's my serial number at the top, which I've blurred out. And we have one working interface. Oh, it doesn't work if I do that. So there is a firmware thing here where we can upgrade the firmware to the latest firmware. And that does that itself very quickly. And I mean, it should be quick because there's very little going on, to be honest. So we can now change the sample rate, ACO preferences, there's a buffer, there's a safe mode, which gives you more latency but stops dropouts. And so if I plug something in, let's just grab a jack cable, and if I plug this in, unlike the AudioFuse, it doesn't have like magical detection circuitry in there, which is probably a part why the AudioFuse range is more expensive, let's be honest. If I click instrument here, that's the same as pressing it on the front of the device and changing that to a high impedance mode, so that with high impedance mode, guitars don't get loaded down and sound all dull and muffly and mushy. And there's a phantom power button, which gives you phantom power across both channels, which it's a little inconvenient that it's not on separate channels, but generally in my experience, you're not going to damage things like dynamic microphones and even ribbon mics, generally in my experience. Although it is nice to have it separately. But again, that adds cost. There's a nice big knob for the monitoring levels. There's a separate headphone out, which is only a big jack. So if there's any feedback that I would have for Arturia, it's something that our audience have started doing is the small and big jacks on the front. It's a slight extra cost, but it's massive convenience upgrade. And something that I do really like on the front of this is there is a very traditional direct monitoring knob, which all the way right, I'm only going to hear what comes through the computer. All the way left, I'm only going to hear directly input 1 and 2. But traditionally, input 1 would probably be my left ear, input 2 would be in my right ear, which can be quite disorienting. But there's a direct mono button so that the left and right then come dead center. So if I've got one microphone plugged into one channel and I want to hear my vocals with 0 latency, I press that button and then it comes out of both headphones right down the middle. Very useful. Personally, I do tend to not use that. I'm more of a software monitoring kind of guy. I know it has some latency involved, but I've just gotten used to that over the years. So we've got stereo TRS outputs, and I'm jiggling this around so it's disconnecting, but I'll put that down in a second. There we go. So we've got TRS balanced outputs. We've got MIDI in and out, which I've been arguing for years that we don't need MIDI on small interfaces because you can get interfaces just for MIDI separately that work in conjunction. But Arturia are a company that are very focused on synths and keyboards. And so for them, that aligns with their brand and that makes logical sense for them. I still think that most of us don't need MIDI jacks on the interface. I think that's an extra unnecessary cost. But like I say, in Arturia's case, that's what they do. They do keyboards, they do MIDI, that is their thing. So in their case, I can see someone who would be drawn to Arturia already is probably drawn into synths, and that satisfies that user base. I get it. The reason I say that is most MIDI keyboards these days have USB on them, so you don't even need to use MIDI jacks. But yeah, if that fits their people, then there you go. And of course, also there was that USB hub connection on the back to then chain something off that. Now, this has installed my Analog Lab Intro, which I've not used before. I've used the full Analog Lab. The Delay Tape 201, which I have used, which is basically a Roland Space Echo. Pre 73, which is a Neve preamp. So the preamps on the Minifuse are going to be very clean, very clear. And then if you want to make them sound vintage, you use that plugin. The Reverb Plate 140 is emulating one of the iconic plate reverbs of the world, the EMT 140. And the Juno 60 is the Roland keyboard that has been emulated in the chorus, June 6. So these have now all been installed. Let's run Reaper. And the first thing is Reaper's going to find the plugins, then it's going to complain that there's an error opening the ACO driver. And that's because I've still got selected in the settings here the driver for my Audient interface, which is currently unplugged. So I now have to drop that down and change this to not Arturia ACO driver, because that's for the audio fuse, but Minifuse. And I've got to make sure that the inputs and outputs are all available to me. This is Reaper specific because you can define not to use. If you've got an interface with a million ins and outs, you can tell Reaper not to use all of them and just to use a select number. But in this case, I want to see them all. And then I hit OK and close. And now when I hit play, I get a nice number in the corner, which in this case has defaulted to 128 samples. Oh, that's because I defined that here. I requested 128 sample latency. It's happily gone with that. And it's given me a 5.1 and 4.5 millisecond round trip, which is really quite low and really decent. I'm going to test out the quality of the instrument input now. And the way to do that, when I plug that in, and I'll make it instrument mode, not only do we get levels that we can see on the front of the interface, but also the volume knob, the gain knob, I do apologize, the gain knob also flashes blue and flashes red if it's if it's clipping. That's a really nice little integrated design. I like that. But yeah, the way to test the quality of a instrument input on something like this is, there we go. So you should be able to hear that now. We can see levels. It sounds horrible because it sounds like a DI guitar. So what I'm going to do is put something like Amplitude on here with a relatively high gain amp sound. And let's just pick... No, let's use Ampcraft, because that's something I've been using recently that sounds exactly like a 5150. And the way to test it is turn off the noise gate and see how bad that is. That's really good. That is... You can actually hear me... That's the pickups, but... Yeah, if I just wind that back... But let's turn that gate back on so that it's nice and clear. And that's a very reasonable noise floor with an amp that's on the red channel, which is loads of gain, loads of gain, loads of gain, lots of volume, lots of gain. I've had interfaces in this price range before where without the gate on, it sounds like a snowstorm. It sounds absolutely awful. And in this case, it really doesn't. And that's one of the big plus points for me. I'm also quickly going to plug the XLR of this Shure mic in. And for that, we're going to, of course, turn off Ampcraft and get rid of the guitar. Okay, so just quickly, I have muted the microphone's USB output, which is what I usually use when I'm recording these kind of videos. This sound is coming entirely from the Minifuse with its gain absolutely maxed out, no processing, and you can see that it's a decent level. This isn't an SM7B, I don't have that to hand, but it's a similar kind of thing where here's the noise floor absolutely with it cranked. That's really low, considering that only a few years ago an interface in this price bracket, if you turn the gain all the way up, would have been incredibly noisy. I wonder, this is speculation on my part, but I wonder if the manufacturers and designers of these kinds of interfaces now design them so that they can actually go slightly higher in gain than they could, but they don't let you go that high on the knob so that the noise floor doesn't suddenly go at the bottom. They call it clean gain, the amount that you can turn this up without getting that noise floor. And this is really quite impressive. And hopefully this sounds all right to you, because it sounds pretty decent to me. Again, this is with no compression, no EQ, no nothing. And you can actually hear things going on in the background in the house through a dynamic mic, which is really quite impressive. So yeah, noise floor is good, latency looks good, and the direct monitor thing in mono is a really useful tool. So I think that's all I need to say on the topic of the Minifuse. So back to me in the studio. Hope you found this interesting. It's certainly something I'm going to be looking forward to using in the future. Thanks everybody who supports us on Patreon for helping to make videos like this possible. Thanks to Arturia for sending this over. And thanks everybody. Like, share, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Thanks everyone. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Hey everyone. That might be the end of the video, but if you fancy carrying on this conversation, we have a Discord server. Link is in the description. We're also on Patreon, which is something you can really help us with. We also are on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Hot Pole Studios. See you there.